Good morning, folks. I'm Mike Briggs. Most of you know me, and most of you know my friend here, Steve Lefave. I'm honored to be out here with Steve on a Saturday morning because it's been a long, long time since I've done this. Steve has stepped up and done contract classes, not every week, but almost every month for the last couple of years. So you all are familiar with him doing that, particularly with NVAR documents. And I'm going to just say that I'm turning it over to Steve to play lead today because he has been doing most of the contract update training, and we're not going to go page by page through all the documents. So I'll add some color commentary after he gets started. But let me just say that, as you may know, the residential sales contract is not changed. There's no updates to that. So we're not going to even be focusing on the main contract document. So thanks for coming out on a Saturday. This is an incredible turnout. It's awesome. So.
Oh, we're glad that you guys could all make it. It's been a long time since we did this live contracts class. We had done it for Zoom during COVID, so it's kind of nice to be back live. This is a little bit. If you came to classes before when we did these on Saturday morning, it was kind of a low key, kind of back and forth type of thing. But this is kind of big production. So. Without further ado, we'll start off. The forms that were changed are currently listed here for you. And these are the order that we're going to cover them in. We're going to start off with our financing contingency changes in regards to the conventional VA and USDA type forms. And then we'll move on to probably what everybody really wants to talk about is the seller's post-settlement occupancy agreement, which changed quite a bit. And then we'll hit some of the other forms on the way out. There were some changes to the property management agreement as well. If you're not a property manager, which is probably nobody here, if there is anybody here, I do have the handout separately for the property management agreement I can give you a copy of and just kind of briefly talk to you about those changes. But for the most part, we're going to stick to what is kind of more generally needed throughout the company. Yeah. So the first form that we're going to talk about is going to be the conventional financing addendum and appraisal contingency. And if I can get the slides to show up over here, that would be greatly appreciated. Mm-hmm. Thank you, man. You're the bomb. So the things that have changed in the financial contingency in regards to our financing contingency addendum, it's been modified to include an appraisal contingency plus gap guarantee, and also to clarify some language in regards to how you can send over what needs to be sent over for a denial letter, and how to deny that or void the contract. Right. So the appraisal contingency language has changed. So we're highlighting the caption on here. So on your financing contingency addendum, paragraph A or B here is your automatic expiration. So really what you're added in here is that the buyer may void the contract by delivering a seller a lender rejection letter for the specified financing by the financing deadline. Before, that specified was missing, so it just called for a denial letter from the lender. So they tightened that up a little bit by adding the specified financing word in order to ensure that that lender letter comes with the actual language for specified financing.
If I may, I'll just say it's surprising that wasn't in there before. Most of you probably know that the term specified financing is a defined term. It's in the definition section of the contract. And so in each of these contingencies, whether it's financing with automatic extension or with automatic expiration, if you're a buyer agent and your buyer is going to be voiding the contract under the financing contingency, they got to make sure that lender denial letter is for the specified financing. And I don't know how much you want to get into that, like interest rate and stuff, but
no. I mean, we don't. I mean, for the most part, I mean, we'll probably have classes more in depth on these if you need them on Samson University. But for today's class, we're probably just really going over the changes. We're not really getting into the details of what, I mean, we all know what specified financing is, correct, right? Yeah. Specified financing is what's determined here on your first page of your financing contingency under paragraph 1, right? Specified financing. So I think what they're trying to tighten up is the lender letters come in sometimes and they say, you know, whatever source of, you know, they were denied for whatever source of funds or whatever they put
different
in there.
Loan amount.
It has to be, it has to marry up to what was put in paragraph 1. So that's and that will especially on the listing agent side, that will clear up a lot of confusion sometimes. And sometimes when you send in your denial letter, the other side will question the validity of it, right? Because it doesn't detail enough what the actual reason was that they were denied. So the lender has to be on board, and you as a buyer agent, to protect your buyer, you have to make sure that that lender letter specifies and marries up to your specified financing in your contract in order to void the contract based on this contingency. So just make sure you protect your buyers in that manner. The next part of this is they added an appraisal contingency plus gap guarantee. So of course, Mike and I went to a thing at NVAR, and the attorney that kind of went over this was kind of funny about it. He said, well, we always notice that these NVAR forms are always later than when we need them, right? So over the past couple years, we've been writing contracts above and beyond what the sale price has been or the list price has been. And this language, we either made up this language or wrote it in an addendum or did something similar to get our client, to get the point across that our client was willing to go above the list price, but only to a point of certain amount of what it would appraise, because not everybody has infinite cash flow in their pocket, right? So they added this language in here, and it's only in the conventional financing contingency and appraisal addendum. So quickly, the appraisal contingency plus gap guarantee. So the parties agree that the buyer will pay the difference, if any, between the appraisal and the sale price up to the amount specified in paragraph 4B1, except as otherwise provided in this contingency. The contract is or is not contingent on an appraisal. If contingent, buyer may satisfy this contingency, negotiate sale price, or void contract by 9 p.m., however many days you put in there, 21, 25, whatever you put in there, days after the date of ratification, by delivering notice to the seller as follows. So this is your appraisal contingency notice. So the first part, number 1, B1, right, is your appraisal plus whatever. So say you have a sale price of a house that you're going to put an offer in and it's $400,000, right? And your client can pay $50,000 above the list price, so up to $450,000. But that's only if it appraises at $400,000, right? So if you put an offer in at $450,000 or bump up or escalate your price up to $450,000 and it appraises at $375,000, does your buyer have the extra $25,000 cash to go to settlement at $450,000? Probably not, right? So here is where this would come into play, right? So you're plussing $50,000, right? So your buyer is willing to go $50,000 above the list price. However, it has to be equal to or greater than the sale price, and the appraisal is satisfied and removed. So if it does appraise at $400,000, you wrote an offer with an escalation up $50,000. You have this paragraph has been satisfied, and your buyer has decided to go to settlement, right? So number 2 is the buyer elects to proceed with consummation of the contract without regards to the appraisal, and this contingency is removed. So this would be the case where, say, you did a $50,000 escalation gap, but it is contingent on an appraisal, right? So it still has to appraise at $400,000, but say it only appraised at $390,000. So, but your buyer still wants it and has the additional cash flow to go to settlement. So they would still be okay with that, and then they would send over the appropriate appraisal notice in order to proceed with the contract. Paragraph 3 is the appraisal plus buyer gap guarantee is equal to or greater than the sale price, but buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of the contract because property either 1, does not satisfy lender requirements, 2, appraisal does not allow for the specified financing, or 3, property is inadequate collateral. Buyer may void contract under this paragraph by delivering the seller appraisal contingency notice accompanied by a written denial of the financing showing evidence of the lender's decision, and the buyer appraisal notice will be included as a copy of the written statement. So that's pretty much the same language from the other contract, right? Except it's got the additional language for the buyer gap guarantee.
The other appraisal contingency.
Right.
And let me just interject. So if you go back to paragraph 4 on this document, I wanted to emphasize that it clearly says select A or B, right? So the B with the plus gap guarantee is obviously the entirely new paragraph. But when you're looking at this, it's one or the other. So we see contracts a lot of times where, whether it's for financing or what, those check boxes, they're not checked. And so sometimes contracts get ratified like that. It's one or the other. And truth is, I don't think we're likely to see the plus gap guarantee clause much. We may in certain markets, but nothing like we did last year and a couple years in a run.
Well, I saw a post on Facebook the other day. Someone listed a townhouse out in South Riding. They were on the market 3 days. They had 16 offers.
16 offers, okay.
So just to kind of...
Well, there you go.
So, yeah. So there's a lot of naysayers out there, but it seems like there's still buyers out there and properties are still selling, right?
Right.
Next section here is paragraph 4. Appraisal plus buyer gap guarantee is less than sale price, and buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of the contract unless seller elects to lower the sale price. Buyer's appraisal contingency notice will include a copy of the written statement and buyer's proposed sale price, which will not be lower than the appraised value, plus the buyer's gap guarantee. So if the buyer can't ask for a lower sale price. So say they were willing to bump the price up $50,000, and then the appraisal came in low, and now they want it at a lower value, even with the $50,000 gap guarantee. Then they can't. They're not supposed to. That says here they're not. This number 3 would not apply, right? So they would have to. If it came in at $375 and the seller elected to lower the price of the $375, the buyer's gap would include that $50,000, so that would make the new sale price $425, right? So paragraph 4. Paragraph 4 goes into the appraisal. I don't know. These thinkclads are going faster than me.
There we go.
So appraisal plus gap guarantee is less than the sale price, and the buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of the contract unless seller elects to lower the price, right? So we talked about that. And then you have the negotiation period, just like you would in any other contract negotiation, right? So you have, say, a 3-day negotiation period in here where you can kind of go back and forth until you come up with a meeting of the minds, and then everybody signs off, right? At any time during the negotiation period, buyer and seller may make, modify, rescind, or alter as many offers and counteroffers as desired to reach mutually acceptable terms, right? So you go through that negotiation period, right? So at the end of 3 days, the seller is adamant that he's going to get $400,000. It appraised at $390, so there's a $10,000 gap, right? So the buyer says, I'm not paying $10,000 extra just to buy this house. I want to buy another house now anyways, or whatever the reason is. Now you go into the buyer's election period, right? So if at the end of the negotiation period, the buyer and seller are unable to come up with an agreement, the buyer will have the option to void contract by delivering notice to the seller by, and however many days you put in there, 1 or 2 days, most people use. And then they would send over that notice. Otherwise, the appraisal contingency will be removed and the contract will remain in full force and effect at the original sale price. So if you don't do this step, your buyer could end up being locked into the price despite the low appraisal. So make sure that you send over that notice as appropriate. If buyer has not delivered appraisal contingency notice by the appraisal deadline, this appraisal contingency will continue up to and including settlement date. So even though you put a number of days up there, right, say 21 days for your appraisal contingency, this contingency automatically extends up to and including settlement date. So up to and including settlement date. So that doesn't mean after the settlement date, that means the settlement date, right? So however, upon expiration of the appraisal deadline, seller may, at the seller's option, deliver notice to the buyer, and the buyer will have 3 days to void the contract. If the buyer does not void the contract within those 3 days following delivery of the seller's notice, this appraisal contingency is removed, and contract will remain in full force and effect without the appraisal contingency. So make sure that you know that, right? So this is the same. This is the same language, right, that we've had in our financing contingency. Yeah. We had the right to automatically extend, or we could choose to automatically expire, right? So in the automatic extend contingency, it had this same language. So now the appraisal has this same language as well, in order to make sure that if you don't meet that date up there at the top, this is what happens. And then I think we talked about this. I was going to say I had my slides messed up, but actually I was messed up. So I wasn't on target with my slides. But once again, that's the specified financing. So that was the language that they added in to make sure that when you send your letter in, that it denotes your specified financing. Do you have any questions on those changes?
Let me speak to the notice. So we have different notice templates, including the appraisal contingency notice, right? NVAR has not come out with an updated appraisal contingency notice yet. I'm suspecting they may, to include this gap language. And just follow, if you're a buyer and you're sending notice under this paragraph 4B with this plus gap guarantee, just read what it says, send notice, and if the standard NVAR appraisal contingency notice isn't working for you, create one on a notice sale. There's a standard template boilerplate notice where you can tell the other side what you're doing. I would capture language from the original, from this contract, and write it. Okay. You haven't heard anything about a new
No,
notice?
that's not one that they mentioned that was changed.
And it's not on the list, so that may be something that's coming or they may modify the existing appraisal contingency notice form.
Any questions on that? So hit the mics on the side if you have a question, and
grab it.
yeah,
So,
or you can just stand.
Just stand up. Oh, stand up. So with that gap, if you check that off, how does that affect like the escalation addendum? Because if you're escalating to a certain point and you're keeping the appraisal, correct?
Right. In this case, with the gap guarantee, you're actually continuing with the regards to the appraisal.
Correct. So that supersedes, like that sales price is, so the sales price is X amount, and then that is just supersedes kind of the escalation addendum, that you will go above and beyond that escalation addendum?
Well, say you did in your contract, you did a sale price offer for $400. I'm going to stick with the $400. So you did a contract offer for $400, and your buyer wants to escalate to $450.
Right.
So they do their escalation addendum to $450,
Right.
and they go with regards to the appraisal, right? Because they want to keep that language from the gap guarantee in their escalation. So they're willing to go $50,000 above the appraised value. So when you did your escalation, you would just still do it the same way. However, you would check that you are doing it with regards to the appraisal. Now, if you're escalating up to $450 without an appraisal,
You're waiving.
You're waiving all that. This gap guarantee and your appraisal would be checking the box that you're going for without regards to the appraisal. So the only.
Yeah, but when you change the escalation addendum, you change that price. You're supposed to change the sales price on the first page of the addendum, correct?
Well,
to
only
match-
if you get ratified, right?
Right. Listing agent would write in, right, the sales price.
So that's
the
your new
escalated
sales price. So does that gap go above that sales price? That's what I'm confused
No,
about.
I don't see the gap ever exceeding sales price.
No.
It's
No.
just the escalated price.
It's still regarding the appraisal, though, even though you're changing the amount. I mean,
I'm sorry, Pam. So if the appraisal comes in low and you've got 50,000 gap the buyer's willing to pay, that would either be up to sales price or up to your escalated amount, but not higher.
Right.
Whatever your max escalation is.
Okay.
And I know it's confusing, and that's a really good question. There's
Yeah,
lots
because
of
I thought you changed the sales price on the first page when you ratify the escalated amount. So that's your new sales price, correct?
yes.
right,
If they can prove it.
right.
But then you've got in the appraisal contingency, the gap that goes above the sales price,
Right.
correct?
Yeah, no.
But it's still, you still have your initial contract price, and then when you win, right? They change the price. They may change. You don't have to, but they may change the price on page 1 from 400 to 450. But the original price for your appraisal would be 400, right? So when you're still contracted with regards to the appraisal, right? So once that appraisal contingency comes in, it appraises at 390. Your gap guarantee only is for 50,000. So now you would have the right to negotiate through that because your escalation brought you to 450, and the gap guarantee only gave you all the way up to 440. So now, according to the conventional the appraisal contingency, you would have a right to negotiate that, and your buyer would have the right to void if the seller wasn't willing to reduce his price by $10,000. So even though they make the changes on page 1 by striking out the old list price and putting in the escalated price, your buyer would still be covered.
Okay. So there's no, where on the contract would it have that original price then?
Well, normally it's just struck out, right?
Right.
Right? Normally we just strike it out
Right.
and then we put right in. And normally I only do that upon the lender's request, right?
Right.
So some people might do that on every time they escalate, but
Okay.
you might only do that on specific cases if the lender requests that. But I think the buyer still would be able to come back and say, hey, our original list price was 400. We had an appraisal contingency that said we were only willing to pay 50,000 above that
Right.
that escalated price.
Right.
It only appraised at 390. We were sending a notice in asking the seller to drop that price by
Gotcha.
$10,000.
Or I think, let's talk about, can the seller, as a listing agent, can you enter in 440? Ratify it, right? I mean, the buyer has agreed to pay
Right.
X amount
But you don't
above
know that
appraisals.
yet. But you don't know that price yet because the
The
appraisal.
appraisal's not in yet.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
You're right.
Yeah, I just, it's a gray area to me.
Yeah.
We'll drill into that a little bit more.
That'll be changed next year, January, when you come. We'll do this again and
We'll
we'll
have more
talk about
donuts.
that
Yeah.
change. Any other questions on that?
Sorry, I'll be short. So to make story short, basically, if I just don't get it, sorry. No, it's like the gap guarantee. Let's say the sales price is 400, right? The contract price is 400. And you give 5,000 gap guarantee, 4 or 5, right? Appraisal comes. I don't understand. Appraisal comes 490. And that means you give 495. What does it mean that buyer has a right to negotiate? They still can negotiate like that. The paragraph 4.
Yeah.
Why
back to
do buyer has right to get out
why does buyer have right to get out?
and seller has right to decide? Before we would if we would agree to it, there is no negotiation. We just move forward.
Right.
But now I don't understand what the negotiation is about.
Well, the reason why they put this in, right, is because during the hot time of the market here over the last 3 years, right, we were writing fancy addendums, right?
Yeah.
Because our buyer was willing to escalate a price point, say $10,000. However, there was some worry that it may not appraise at that, and they only had an additional $10,000. They didn't have $20,000. So if it appraised $10,000, so we were writing fancy language in an addendum saying, hey, we're willing to pay this, but not willing to pay that, only if it comes in at this number and not in this number. And so you had to have a legal degree in order to understand what was actually being written, right?
Yeah.
So now what they've done is they've put it into the contingency itself. So now if you have a buyer that is interested in a property, and they have, say they have 50, I'm going to stick with my 50,000. If they have $50,000 that they have extra cash, they're putting 20% down, but they have an extra $50,000 in their billfold that they're okay with spending on this property, but they don't have 60,000. They don't have 70,000. So they're relying on the fact they're making the contract contingent on an appraisal, but they're willing to pay that extra $50,000 if it comes in at the appraised value as the list price. But if that list price, if that appraisal comes in below list price, they don't want to pay that extra amount, and they want the right to get out of the contract if the seller's not willing to drop the price.
Okay, so let's say right to negotiate. We were at 400 plus 5,000 if it's gonna appraise. So now appraisal came at 390. So I can go back to seller and say, hey, I'm not gonna give you anything on top anymore.
No, you can't do that.
Oh, you can't. Okay.
No, you can. You've already said you're going to give them a $5,000 above. You can't go back and say, hey, the appraisal came in at 390. We want it at 390.
Okay.
You have to. It's 395.
So your negotiation is only 5,000 above of appraised value.
That would be correct.
That's it. Okay.
Okay.
And seller has right to kick you out if they don't agree. No.
Well, it's a negotiation,
Okay.
right?
Right.
So yes.
It's made more complicated for us.
Read it 5 times and send us an email on Monday or Tuesday. Monday's a holiday for some.
Hi.
Those are good questions, and it is all new, and so maybe it's not perfect, but yes. Hi, Jess.
Hi. How's it going? Thanks for doing this. So can I explain the way that I'm understanding it?
Absolutely.
And then I don't know if it's right, but I think if I'm understanding it right, maybe
Sure.
it'll help to explain it. So,
As long as it's in line with what I just
It
said.
is.
I'm good with it.
It is. It's very similar. So, so the house is for sale, right, for $350,000. That's the price the sellers are asking, okay? And it's escalated up to 400 because there's a bidding war. So now the new agreed price is $400,000. So forget the 350. Now you're all in agreement to pay $400,000 for this house. Then they're going to do that gap coverage. So, okay, well the sellers were asking 350, but we're agreeing to 400,000. So what if it doesn't appraise? Well, that's the gap coverage. That's, hey, if it doesn't appraise for 400 and only appraises for 380, I'm willing as the buyer to put the $20,000 difference in there. Now, that is what the gap coverage is, that $20,000. The buyer is like, yep, I'm in, I'm doing it. There's no negotiations, that's it, right? But then if it appraises less than $20,000 off, it's $30,000 off. The buyers are like, well, I said I'd do 20, but I can't do 30. That's where the negotiations come in. Your price is still 400. It's not 405. It's not. Does that make sense?
Hey, Jess, why don't you come sit here and we'll trade places. I'll go get some donuts.
I needed it to dumb it down for myself. So.
Yeah, that helps.
Yes. I mean, you can still write your offer without regards to the appraisal, right? So if your buyer wants to escalate and they don't want to use an appraisal contingency, they can still check the appropriate box in this contingency that it's not contingent on an appraisal, and in the escalation to them, check the box that says that they're going forward without regards to an appraisal, and whatever that price is that price. The only time you're going to need this is if you have a buyer that only has a certain amount of money that they can pay above the list price. So you as an agent, right, you do your comps, and you say this house looks like it's only going to appraise at 380. They're asking 400. You're escalating to 450, and I know $50,000 is as much as you have. Then this gap guarantee may be the answer for that buyer. for other buyers who have infinite cash and they just want to throw it out there, you don't need that.
Yeah, if
Okay?
you're going to waive your appraisal altogether, right?
One more question, and then we're gonna
This should
hopefully
be
move
quick. So, if the agreed upon sales price is 400,000, but let's say it just appraises at 390, and we go with her example of the 20K above. So at that point, pretty much everyone's in agreement that it's now 410. So even if the agreed upon sales price is the 400K, are we still agreeing to go above that agreed upon? Because I know earlier
Not
you
the way
said
it's written, no. It
Okay.
says up to sales price.
because in the past 2 years I've done not to exceed the sales price. So even if it comes in at 395 and we agreed on 20K, then my buyers only give a 5,000 more to stop it at 400,000. Is that what we're understanding?
Yeah, it starts out saying that the parties agree that buyer will pay the difference, if any, between appraisal and sales price. That's the
Okay.
Now,
Right.
Pam's question about escalation addendum and everything, that's going to
Yeah.
take a little more.
Beside the escalation addendum, more just let's just keep it to a simple contract, the sales price
Exactly.
and the appraisal. So
And again, this does
Okay.
not apply to FHA or VA, right? So you won't see that language in those addenda, which he's probably going to.
Why doesn't that apply?
Yeah, why doesn't it apply?
Because it's federal law, right? Federally mandated that the buyers for VA and FHA have the right to void the contract based on the appraisal, right? So no matter what you write in, it doesn't matter, right? There's a song like that. It doesn't really.
It's
no.
the VA statement of value and the FHA amendatory clause. Buyer shall suffer no penalty by forfeiture of deposit, nor otherwise be obligated to complete the purchase if the appraisal comes in low, period. I still think the VA needs to get their act together on this, because we all saw a lot of unfortunate, highly qualified VA buyers with a lot of money in the bank not getting included, not even being considered because of this.
All right, moving on. So next on the docket is the FHA financing contingency addendum. This is going to be pretty quick and dirty, really. All they did was update the language to give the same language in regards to the rejection letter from the lender addressing the specified financing, right? So the only thing they added was the buyer may void the contract by delivering the seller a lender rejection letter for the specified financing. So once again, they added that specified financing language to the FHA financing contingency, and that is on both the automatic extension and the automatic expiration.
It's weird because I swear in years past that specified financing, those two words were in there. They were in there, and they took them out, and now they put them back.
Well, that's the way they work, right? They change it, and then a couple years later, they change it back, right? That's kind of, we wouldn't be here today if they, come on. Job security for us.
Exactly.
We get paid extra for these classes.
Are you buying those donuts, or is Donnie?
I have no comment. So I'm assuming, and no questions on that, right? So that's pretty short and sweet, right? For the FHA, that was the only change really to that form, was adding that specified financing language, or specified lender. So the same thing holds true for the VA. The VA, there's that, and one other thing with the VA that was added, right? So the VA financing contingency was modified to address a new VA regulation specifying that veterans are not prohibited from being charged the wood destroying pest insect fee and from paying the cost of the repairs. So if you remember before, right, the VA finance, or the VA contingency said that the buyer could not pay for that. So remember, we would sit down, and when we went through the contract, we made sure that the seller had to pay for that and any repairs if there was any wood destroying insects found. But now the buyer can pay for that for VA, and they can also negotiate repairs as needed for any type of termite damage.
They're taking baby steps over at the Veterans Administration. They need to do more, but that's an improvement.
Right. So here's the language, right? And it also gives you a link to the document for that change online. So actually, it's a hyperlink on your form. If you click on that link when you're playing around with this document, it'll take you to that VA place where you can read about it. If
you know what's funny is this had come out, and I was aware of that hyperlink thanks to NVAR. I had not otherwise been aware of the change. And we had a contract that was written prior to this, back in November or whatever. And one of our agents emailed me and asked about this because the other side was saying that the seller had to pay it, and not anymore. So it's not. It's effective now, even if your contracts were written before.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a change. It's a regulational change that went into effect January 1st. So even if your contract was ratified before and you used the old addendum, theoretically, well, if your buyer pushed it, they would, or the seller pushed it, they would fall underneath this new regulation. And then also on that same form is the specified financing information, which we've been talking about in every addendum so far. So they altered that. They added that language in there for the specified financing for the rejection letter. So just make sure that you're, once again, make sure that you cover your buyer in that regards. And that's both on the automatic extension and the automatic expiration. And then, is there any questions on that? No questions. That means we've done an outstanding job. Mm-hmm. And of course, that will all come to an end because we're going to go into the seller's post-settlement occupancy agreement, which there'll be a barrage of questions.
But it's a big improvement overall.
So the post-settlement occupancy agreement, this form has been substantially revised and modified several areas of conflict. So they've moved language that the agreement is not a lease or subject to the VRLTA to the top page. So they moved that from somewhere in the middle of the document to the top of the first page. So it's blatantly obvious when everybody sees it. It's not a lease, right? And then, so there it is, right? Voila, right there at the top of the first page. Can't miss it. It's in bold letters, right in the top of your thing, right? Not subject to the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenants Act, right? Next on the docket, right? Paragraph 1 is an occupancy charge. They removed the option to calculate a PITI, right? So that makes it a lot simpler for us as agents, right? We don't have that option. We can still do it in our mathematical heads, right, if we want, and put it in as the per day charge, but we're no longer going to check a box that says that it's going to be at the buyer's PITI.
Just a flat per diem that you agree upon.
Right.
Or a flat amount for the entire term, right?
Correct.
So you can still get with your lender and your title company and have that PITI calculated, and that's going to happen because historically that's been considered to be a very reasonable number, right? That's the buyer's new obligation, so why shouldn't the seller cover that at least?
Plus a HOA.
Plus HOA, yeah.
Then also paragraph 2 is the occupancy deadline. Clarifies that if the seller vacates the property before the deadline, the seller will remain responsible for the property maintenance and condition and utilities until the deadline, unless parties agree otherwise. So here that is in the actual contract itself, right? So they've got it in our contract now, paragraph 2, occupancy deadline. We fill in that seller must vacate and give possession of the property and keys to the buyer at on or before 9 p.m. and whatever that date is. So now we've always had issues, right, with when people vacate early, we're representing the buyer, our buyer's on vacation, and all of a sudden the seller contacts us and says we'll be out in 2 days, okay? So vacate early. If the seller vacates property before deadline, buyer will or will not refund any unused part of the occupancy charge. Now that was in the old agreement, right? But a lot of people never checked anything. So make sure you check it, because it can cause dispute in regards to, well, it doesn't cause dispute if the daily rate is 0, but if it can cause disputes in regards to who's responsible for what when they move out, right?
Right.
So if the seller vacates the property before the deadline, seller must give buyer at least 3 days written notice before vacating. If seller vacates property before the deadline, seller will remain responsible for property maintenance and condition and for paying the cost of utilities until the seller vacates. Then buyer will be responsible for the property maintenance and condition and for paying the cost of utilities from the date seller vacates. So they have outlined here now that even though the seller vacates whatever at whatever time, they also, unless the key language in here is the buyer will take exclusive possession of the property. So there has to be an agreement between the buyer and the seller that the buyer is taking exclusive possession of the property in order for the seller not to be liable for paying the utilities and maintenance and condition of the property until the deadline. So make sure that in most cases that's easy, right? The buyer wants to get into the property, but there have been cases in the past where, you know, the seller wants out or gets out, shuts off all the utilities, and the buyers are on a cruise ship in the Bahamas, right? Because they were expecting the sellers to be in the property for another week. So this was added in later on. This was added in order to protect the parties from that happening. So default, if the seller fails to vacate the property by the deadline, buyer will pay buyer double the occupancy rate, or if checked, whatever that daily rate is. So that was pretty much in the old one anyways, right? So that's the same verbiage from the old one.
And back to exclusive possession, if the seller vacates early, they are again obligated until the deadline, whatever the deadline is, unless you have, the idea is written communication from the buyer. And we're going to get to another section in here where the parties are encouraged to deal directly with one another, right? But you got to really protect your client. And so if this clause about taking possession, it doesn't mean that the buyer has to move in, right? Exclusive possession, they have to communicate that, okay, we understand you're leaving early, and we have the key, we have keys, and we're going to take responsibility for utilities and maintenance of the property.
I think the exclusive possession also kicks in. It also kicks in that 3-day period that you as the buyer have to look over the property and notify the escrow agent in regards to any deficiencies in the property, which that verbiage has changed too. So you want to make sure that all these timelines hook up, because your buyer could be standing there with no security deposit being held by the escrow agent anymore. So I'm going to use that cruise. I'm out on a cruise. The sellers leave. We agree to take exclusive possession. However, I'm still out on a cruise for another 5 days. I can't do a property inspection during that 5 days. Guess what? I may have lost my my security deposit. Doesn't mean I have the right. I've lost the right to go after the seller for damages. It just means that the escrow agent may not have that money anymore. But we're going to get to that. Next paragraph is paragraph 3, which is the security deposit paragraph. So they moved this paragraph to the first page due to its importance. Includes stronger language that the parties irrevocably instruct the escrow agent to release funds to the seller if a list of deficiencies is not delivered or received in 3 business days, including language that parties will indemnify, not hold escrow agent liable for any loss arising out of the disbursement of the security deposit.
So this clearly favors the seller, right? I mean, if it used to say that the escrow agent, which is often the title company, and that's who we prefer that you guys enter in as escrow agent for these rent-back security deposits, unlike earnest money deposits, which we like you to have it with Samson for good reason, but with the rent-back security, it should be the title company. And the prior language clearly said that it still said that the buyer had to deliver any list of deficiencies within 3 business days following the deadline to both the seller and to the escrow agent. But what it further used to say was, despite that, the escrow agent may release the funds or may not. And the attorney that we saw the other day had a good analogy. He called that permissive language. I like that. It was the way it used to be written. It was whether it was up to the escrow agent if they felt like they wanted to release it. And we all know that the vast majority of title companies still would not release their earnest money, the security deposit, back to the seller, even though the buyer hadn't followed the prescribed procedures by delivering that list of deficiencies by the deadline. Carrie, Lindsay, and I had this talk many times, especially when we had the seller and our seller wanted that money back. So that old language of may has been replaced by escrow agent is irrevocably instructed, right?
Right.
So that's really strong substantive change. And if you're a buyer agent, especially if you're going to take a step back and let buyers and sellers communicate post-settlement with all this post-settlement occupancy and walkthrough stuff, you really have to remind your buyer, seriously, don't miss that.
Right. And we're going to review that language here anyways. So in paragraph 3, security deposit, seller will escrow at settlement whatever that dollar amount is as a security deposit to be held by, and as we discussed, it's best to be held by the settlement company that is doing your closing. Buyer may, without prejudicing other legal rights and remedies, use all or any part of the security deposit to defray any cost incurred because of seller's noncompliance with this agreement. Buyer must conduct a post-occupancy inspection of the property and deliver to the seller and escrow agent a list of deficiencies within 3 business days after deadline, or waive any claim to security deposit. If escrow agent does not receive this list of deficiencies within the specified time, the parties irrevocably instruct the escrow agent to release funds to seller. If, however, buyer delivers list of deficiencies to the seller and escrow agent within the 3 business days, security deposit will be held in escrow until 1, all parties have agreed in writing as to its disposition, 2, a court of competent jurisdiction orders disbursement and have agreed in writing as to its disposition. I read the same line twice, man. Sorry about that. A court of competent jurisdiction ordered disbursement and all appeals periods have expired. Or 3, disposed of in any other manner authorized by law. Seller and buyer agree that no escrow agent will have any liability to any part or account of disbursement of the security deposit or the account of failure to disburse the security deposit, except only in the event of the escrow agent's gross negligence or willful misconduct. Seller and buyer further agree that the escrow agent will not be liable for the failure of any depository in which security deposit is placed, and that the seller and buyer will indemnify, defend, and save harmless escrow agent from any loss of expense arising out of the holding, disbursement, or failure to disperse security deposit, except in the case of escrow agent's gross neglect or willful misconduct.
Thank you, Steve.
So I mean, there's a couple questions, right, that kind of always come in with that paragraph, right? So it does say 3 business days. Remember that? Okay. Everything else in our contract is days, right? And here now they throw out business days, right? 3 business days. Yeah. Number 1. But then the other question is, who do we notify, right? As the buyer's agent, most of the time, do we notify the settlement? Do we notify the settlement attorney? Who do we notify, right? So make sure, as a buyer agent, when you're doing that settlement and you have a post-settlement occupancy, you get the email address of whoever you have to notify on the settlement side of where that notification needs to go to if there are any discrepancies. Because you don't want your notification going to your settlement attorney who's on vacation, and post-closing is the one that you're supposed to notify, and they zip away. So here's the reason why I don't think they're going to zip away your money in 3 business days or on the 4th day, is because there's going to be some communication. If they get an email at one person, that email doesn't get forwarded to the right person, and that money gets dispersed. However, I did email the settlement company, but they didn't hold the money. Now who's liable? Is that gross neglect or what? So don't expect on the 4th day that money's going to get dispersed, because you as the buyer's agent, make sure you know who to send that email to or who to get that notification to, so that that money gets held, right?
And there's a new section on the last page of this, which I know he's going to get to, and it's called notice information.
You're always ahead of me.
But there's also the paragraph 6A in the contract for delivery, notice delivery to seller. So you should always,
Right.
if you're the buyer agent, you're going to send it to whatever's in there, as well as anything additional that might be on here.
So then paragraph 5, right, gets into notices. They added this paragraph to clarify that following settlement, any notice communication will occur between the parties directly. If the parties' contact information is not provided at or before settlement, the parties authorize the broker and or settlement agent to release the contract information. So that's put here in this notice section, paragraph 5. For the purpose of this agreement, buyer and seller acknowledge and agree that listing broker and cooperating brokerage are removed from all communication or notices after settlement date. Following settlement date, all communications and or notices will be delivered to buyer or seller directly. Buyer and seller will exchange contact information at or before the settlement. If a party fails to exchange contact information with the other party at or before settlement, buyer and seller authorize broker and or settlement agent to release contact information to the requesting party. Buyer and seller will indemnify, save, and hold broker and or settlement agent harmless from all claims, complaints, disputes, litigation, judgments, and attorney's fees arising from the release of such contact information. Scary, right? Oh my God. So,
It's a big change, or it's a big addition to this document.
you know, and the one thing I want to stress here too from the attorney was, you know, we as agents, right? Do we really just hand off our client and say, okay, it's all yours now, right? Hey, gotcha, thanks for the cash, we're out of here, right?
Some agents do, right? Not us.
But you know, if you're creating relationships with your clients and you want to end on a good note, don't abandon them on the post-settlement occupancy period. Trust me, okay? So even though this says what it says, you can be involved in the side.
It doesn't prohibit. It
Right.
doesn't say you can't communicate. It is. You could read into it that, hey, this says it's almost like the realtors can't. It's on the buyer and seller, but that's not the interpretation. Obviously, we can continue to communicate with our clients, and we should. Dan Withers, our in-house counsel, who is he's on the attorney roundtable with NVAR, and he's a past chairman of their standard forms committee. He was very much involved with some of these changes as well, and he made a comment to us that one option, if you wanted to, is strike that. You could strike that language. You could strike that whole paragraph if you wanted to. The company's not taking a position on whether you should or shouldn't. You know, we've all been many of us, if you've done enough deals, especially with rentbacks, or anything with escrows, security deposits, you've experienced situations where you get sucked into it, you know, weeks, and we certainly do. We spend so much time on escrow release disputes. So does Cardinal Title and every title company. So it is a good way for the title companies to be relieved of, or whoever the escrow agent is, to be relieved. You know, the part about the money, they're irrevocably instructed to release it. I agree, it won't be maybe on day 4 or whatever, but it makes it easier for sellers to get their money back. And but This does not prohibit the agents from remaining involved, and buyer agents, again, make sure you remind your people of the deadline. Even if you're going to, even if on the last page where you give the contact info for the other party, make sure that they're aware of that deadline. If nothing else, be able to document that you reminded them of that.
All right, moving on to paragraph 6. So they've also, which
Can
is
I
the
ask a question
property.
here before we go further? In that situation,
That's against my philosophy. Did you see it? No, go ahead.
As a buyer agent in this situation, if you try to contact the seller, the listing agent, and he refused to cooperate, can you go straight to the seller, since it said you can?
Going to get to that.
The buyer and the seller can communicate directly as per this change.
As a
I
service
would
com-
advise you as the agent for, say, the representative of the buyer not to contact the seller directly. I would allow the buyer and the seller to contact each other, but probably not the best idea for you to get in there.
Right.
If the listing agent isn't communicating back with you regarding that, I would just recommend my buyer get in touch directly with the seller.
Because it says right there, buyer and seller will exchange their
Yes,
contact
right.
information.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, where was I? Property maintenance and condition. So this paragraph was modified as well to address questions of whether property must be broom cleaned, trash removed if sold as is. Includes language that the seller must deliver any keys, fobs to the buyer at the deadline. So here this one is in a nutshell. Seller will maintain the property, including electrical, plumbing, existing appliances, heating, air conditioning, and fixtures in substantially the same condition as of the settlement date, except as agreed in paragraph 8 below, and any modifications to the contract through the as-is property condition, paragraph 2B of the contingencies/clauses addendum. Seller would deliver property in substantially the same physical condition as on settlement date and broom cleaned with all trash and debris removed. Seller will deliver to buyer remaining keys, mailbox keys, key fobs, codes, and digital keys, if any. So the key information here, right, to take away is make sure that you do a pre-settlement walkthrough, right? Because the post-settlement occupancy security deposit and discrepancies are really only dated from the date of the settlement walkthrough to the end of the post-settlement occupancy, right? So if you have discrepancies from your contract, when you do your walkthrough prior to settlement, any issues that you see in the house, that should be addressed through the main body of the contract. Now when you get into the post-settlement occupancy period, those are really only issues that change from the date of the settlement to the date that the people left the property at the end of the post-settlement occupancy period.
Yeah.
So one of the important things here to remember is don't ever forego that pre-settlement walkthrough because they have a post-settlement occupancy period and you say, oh, we'll take care of it then.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter whether it's occupied or not occupied or how meticulous the seller is keeping that property, do your pre-settlement walkthrough as a buyer agent. I would argue even, we could debate whether as a listing agent, if you should lean on that buyer agent to do their walkthrough. I think it's in the best interest of all parties and in the spirit of the contract that even if you're a listing agent, you should be saying, so people may disagree with this, but as a listing agent, I would want to know, hey, buyer agent, all right, when are you doing your walkthrough? You haven't told me yet. Are you going to do one? That kind of thing. If they don't do it, it could end up potentially hurting them and maybe possibly benefiting the seller. But we're not looking to get over on people. So hopefully everybody will do that.
Well, most of the time it comes from the other side, actually. I always hear where someone's going to do a pre-settlement walkthrough and they get pushback from the seller saying, why do you have to do a pre-settlement walkthrough? We're going to occupy the property for the next month and a half. Can't they just do it then? Well, if you're going to do it that way, that's fine. Make sure you do an addendum that extends that, hey, the seller has refused to allow pre-settlement occupancy. Any discrepancies in the property will be held from paragraph 10 of the contract, right? So if the paragraph 10 said from the time of the home inspection or whatever, make sure you do the appropriate addendum saying, okay, we'll forego this. However, we're going to put language in there that protects my buyer, not from point B, but all the way back to point A.
Yeah, but just don't do it. I mean,
That's
buyer,
I'm not on the standard form, so I can't
Awesome.
do that.
buyer has the contractual right, of course, we all know that. And so we have had situations where the seller, we have the buyer, other brokerage has the seller, and that seller is trying to, deny pre-settlement access within those 7 days prior to closing. Maybe they'll say, well, no, we don't want you in until the morning of closing. And we've had that where it's our seller client. If that happens, give us a call or whatever, because we'll try to intervene, and contractually that doesn't fly, right? So they got to allow that access.
Okay, moving on, which I'm sure will pose a lot of questions. It's the new home warranty language, right? That they added into this post-settlement occupancy. So this, the terms and conditions of this paragraph supersede the terms and conditions of paragraph 18 of contract only if home warranty is selected below. So yes or no, home warranty policy with seller coverage selected by buyer or seller and paid for and provided at settlement by buyer or seller. Cost not to exceed whatever that amount is. Warranty provider to be whatever that company is. For services and or maintenance calls through deadline, deductibles will be paid for by whomever. So they've added this home warranty language in here. I think mainly they've added in here is to make everyone aware of if there's a home warranty in the contract, the buyer gets a home warranty, how that's going to relate into the post-settlement occupancy. Because how many of us out here have had our buyer have a home warranty, something goes wrong during the post-settlement occupancy with the seller, and the seller calls and says, well, why don't you guys take care of it under your home warranty? We bought you a home warranty at settlement. Well, if it's not disclosed who's paying for what, because really what this is really who's going to pay the deductible, right? So if you don't put it in here, now it's a negotiation or a fight after the fact, right? Mm-hmm. The seller's obligated to get it repaired. However, now you're fighting over, is it going to cost $100 or $1,000? The seller, of course, wants to get away as cheaply as possible at $100, if they can pay the deductible and get this resolved. But you have to make sure that it's disclosed, and you have to make sure that the protection that you have in your home warranty, they will protect the seller during that occupancy period.
Right. So it's not required. If you have a warranty in your main contract to convey, or whether it's buyer or seller that's buying it, you don't have to check this. It says that the terms of this one on this post-settlement occupancy agreement will supersede the terms and conditions of paragraph 18 only if you check the box below. If you invoke this paragraph on this addendum below, but it definitely says with seller coverage, see? So it might have been that the seller is going to pay for a buyer warranty in the main contract warranty paragraph. They're agreeing to pay for a buyer warranty, but that doesn't include seller coverage unless it's a seller coverage policy. I understand a lot of you might not know the difference between those two, but one of the things that I believe is involved here is underlying this. It's a good idea to have a warranty if you're going to do a seller rent back. Warranties are good anyway, always, right? From an E&O standpoint, our E&O company likes it, and they ask us, they want confirmation from us that a home warranty has been offered. And we're able to say yes, it's always offered. Why? Because it's in our standard form contract. In other words, the buyer has an opportunity, buyer and seller have an opportunity to get one. They're informed on it, and seller coverage makes it better in these cases when there's a seller rent back, because the home warranty company is, on the rent back, they're responsible for the property, right, while they're in there. Well, if they're going to file the claim it pretty much needs to be a seller warranty coverage. It's going to become a buyer policy as soon as they vacate or whatever, but the warranty company might not talk to the seller. They might say, well, this policy is in the name of the buyer, unless it was set up as initially as seller coverage as well.
Right.
So, yeah, encourage your people. You know, we could step back and say, avoid rent backs like the plague, if you can. If you're the listing agent, the buyer can always hold that seller hostage one way or another. There are risks. It's convenient having the rent back, but there's a downside. And you know, as we go forward, I think we're going to see fewer of them, a little bit less, if the market continues to move more towards buyers.
Correct. All right, paragraph 8. Fire, flooding, and casualty damage. So they retitled this paragraph to clarify that the buyer bears the risk of loss for acts of God. Casualty loss clarifies the seller's responsibility for maintaining insurance policy for personal property and liability, and buyer's responsibility for maintaining homeowner's insurance. So that's pretty much what that covers in that paragraph.
On that, real quick, let me just say, if you're a listing agent, definitely advise your clients to speak to their insurance agent on, you know, what type of amendment to their existing homeowner policy needs to be put in place, or an entirely new policy altogether, because it's no longer a homeowner's policy. And if they don't talk to their insurance company, they may not have coverage, right?
Right. So they'll normally have to convert their policy from a seller to more like a renter's insurance policy for that, like for those like of tenants.
Yep.
All right, next on the docket is the access paragraph, paragraph 9. So they've modified this paragraph to afford parties the option of negotiating whether buyer is granting access to show the property during the duration of the seller occupancy. Clarify that 24-hour notice is reasonable notice. So if you look at that access paragraph in the contract, it says the seller will permit buyer reasonable access to the property and will deliver one set of keys to the buyer at settlement. Buyer and buyer's agent will or will not have the right to show the property to prospective buyers or tenants prior to the deadline, during reasonable hours, and upon not less than 24 hours notice. Buyer and or buyer's agent may place a for rent or for sale sign on the property, to place an electronic lockbox on the property containing keys necessary to access the property. So reasonable access, right? 24-hour notice.
That's an improvement. I mean, you get a lot of situations where, the buyer thinks that they've got the right to go at any time to bring contractors over to get estimates for improvements that they're going to make. They want to get a lead on that timeline so they can start ordering materials and all
right,
that.
Barbara?
Yeah. Oh, I guess you had a situation.
Right, Barbara?
Any questions on access at all? Okay.
All right, and then of course, the part of the form that we're most concerned about is our buyer and seller's information going to the other party. Oh my God, right? So here they've added this on to the back page of the agreement, which pretty much you can complete this either when you're filling out the agreement, which probably we would not do, but you could have this. You could fill this portion out at the settlement table, and or just exchange the required information at the table without using this form, or pull this off the form itself, fill it out, make a copy, one for the buyer, one for the seller, and everybody goes on their merry way. Are we all excited about that? Yes.
Everybody understand that, right? Why give up your information until the end? Until the seller is remaining in your buyer's property, or vice versa.
So you don't have to fill this out until settlement, right? And they put a little caveat in there, to be completed by the parties at or before settlement. Any questions whatsoever on this seller's post-settlement occupancy agreement?
Chris,
To the mic.
to the mic, if you would. or wherever the mic is.
There's one on each side.
Pretty loud, but, I think what I want to point out is in Chapter 7 here on the post-occupancy, I'm not sure if a lot of people realize this, but 210 offers free seller coverage. So it's always good to contact 210 Warranty and make sure your sellers are protected. I've seen this 100 times in this business, and it's come in really handy. That's all I wanted to point out.
Right.
210 offers a free home warranty for seller coverage. Well, the idea is for the buyers to purchase that contract, but they still offer the warranty.
Yeah.
And it's come in really handy for me. So I just want to point that out.
It helps you to win listings too. When you tell, but warranty for the client.
Warranties are a good thing. They don't always cover everything, obviously, but when you can bring that warranty in and help solve a problem with your transaction, that's a small price to pay on such a big deal.
All right, then we get into our next,
Just a
one
very
question.
quick question. Maybe I'm missing here something. Number 9, buyer and or buyer's agent may place a for rent or sale sign on property and in place an electric lockbox. Can you just elaborate on this? It's what time are we? This is post, right?
Right, so this is during the post-settlement occupancy period. You have an investor client that bought it, and maybe they're gonna put it up for rent. So once they bought the property, they're gonna put it in the MLS, and they're gonna ask the sellers who now are in the property to cooperate in order to have the property available for showing. So that allows you to be able to put an electronic lockbox on, and also a sign up in the yard that says it's for rent.
Well, if that box is checked.
Remember, reasonable access.
24-hour notice.
So, remember? So normally it's best to work with them and say, hey, of course, we bought this as an investment property. We would like to show the property. Can we come up with a scenario where we can put that in the MLS and maybe show it twice a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays between 1 and 4? We're good with that. We're good with that. You come up with an agreement, and then you do it as you show it as you guys negotiated.
So
Well,
the difference here between
somewhat.
the prior version, most of this language is the same, but the primary difference is that checkbox. Buyer and or buyer's agent will or will not have the right to show the property to prospect. The buyer themselves still has the right to come to the property within reasonable access, and they've defined that. This is pretty serious if you're a does it say 24 hours, right? That didn't used to be in there. And if you're a listing agent and there's a rent back, you might want to make sure they're aware of that. 24 hours is not a lot of notice, really, for a lot of people. But the buyer owns that house. And they, under the new language, they've got the right to come themselves and perhaps bring a contractor with them, right, for measurements and this or that. But for showing it to buyers or tenants and or having a lockbox, I think that requires one of the box to be checked, that they will have that right.
Does this cover the lease transfer?
No.
No, yeah. The question was, does this cover provisions when you have a lease transfer, an existing lease that's transferring? No, and if anybody wants to reach out to me later, I've got an addendum that I drafted years ago on that if you have a buyer that's taking title subject to an existing lease and the lease is going to transfer to the new buyer, I've got some good protection language for the buyer. NVAR has never come up with a clause or an addendum for that, but.
All right. Anyone else? All right. So moving on to so this kind of picks up some speed here from here. So the next on the docket is changes to the lease. So VRLTA.
And by the way, there is no more common law lease, right?
Correct.
All leases are subject to VRLTA, whether your landlord has their own preferred old school lease or not. They're still subject to VRLTA.
So This form has been substantially revised to streamline language, consistently use defined terms, and replace shall with will. So that's throughout the document. It's just strengthening the language within the lease. It reorganized the paragraphs for consistency and logical flow. So what happens is they change the flow 1 year and then they move it back to close to the same way that it was a couple years ago. So that's pretty much what they've done. I kind of highlighted this portion in the lease term paragraph because they have removed some stuff in here and kind of streamlined the language in here. And there was some language in here that I wanted to make sure I pointed out that wasn't in here before. And it's not noted in here, so I wanted to make sure that it was understood that it was in here. But if you look in this lease term paragraph, okay, of course it defines the period of the lease term and all that kind of stuff. And then it gets into if tenant does not vacate the premises by the lease end date, landlord may immediately seek eviction and or recover damages against the tenant. So that was new language from what I saw from the previous lease agreement. So make sure that when you're representing a tenant that they understand that they have to be out unless there's a agreed upon extension or renewed lease, that they have to be out by the end of the term of the lease.
That's in paragraph 2, right?
Paragraph 2.
And that comports with recent changes to VRLTA.
Correct. They also updated this notice section, or actually they moved stuff from other paragraphs around and they created this notice paragraph. And it says all notices will be in accordance with the VRLTA. Any notice provided for or permitted it in this lease will be given by one party to the other. And of course you have to check a box whether that is. In most cases we're checking electronic because the email is sufficient for that type of transfer of information. And the tenant and or landlord will give notice of any changes in their email address or telephone numbers, and then they have to fill out this information. So how many times as the listing agent for a rental, do you get a call later on from the tenant saying, hey, I don't know how to get in contact with the landlord? I mean, it was in paragraph 8 before, I think it was. The information was in there, but no one it's like Google now. No one looks past page 1. So pretty much we're going to have one-page documents from now on. They're going to be 6 feet long, but they'll be one page. No. So they moved that around and they put that into that notice paragraph.
Can we add a notification via text if you have delivered electronically? Can we add that legally to the contract?
Yes.
Yeah. I think text.
The question was, can you use text? Can you add provision that notice will be delivered via text? Yes, you can legally. If you,
Notification that the electronic delivery has been made because
Right.
we miss our emails.
The problem with text messaging is you have, I mean, I think you can, but however with text messaging, you have no confirmation that it has been delivered or received. In email, you can set a delivery or a confirmation in regards to when you're sending pertinent documents to the tenant. If you're the landlord, that you can send via email and get a confirmed receipt back that it has been either looked at or whatever. So, I mean, you can send it via text and you can print out your text and all that kind of stuff, but you never can get confirmation unless they respond on the other side that they have received it. So just,
My question was, in addition to electronic.
you can, but like I was saying, as
we
a
recommend
landlord,
against it.
right. If you're the landlord and you're sending a pertinent notice over like, hey, we haven't received the rent yet, you have 5 days to pay or quit, and you never get a response from that, and you end up in court and you show a text message and the tenant says, I never received that. Now, does that validate your notice or not? It may not, I don't know, but
No, it says a deliver.
Yes.
Text messages usually say.
We need microphones for you guys,
Right.
okay? If,
right.
so anybody that
Right.
wants to comment or ask a question, please, we
We'd
we can pass these around so you don't have to jump, but
So-
it's up to you.
All right, so next on here, they also updated the rent paragraph, which is paragraph 4. has been reorganized and restructured to promote clarity and to ensure all relevant information is provided. Now, me personally, I really like this change, okay? This is the best change I've ever seen, right? Here in one page, right, you can find out all the information you need as a prospective tenant and know when you got to pay whatever it is that it is that you owe. So in all these boxes here are form fillable. So as you go along, right, so you have to fill in the amount of the rent, when is it due, who is it delivered to, right? And then also for prorated rent, when you're figuring that out, you can put your little, this has always been a pain in the behind, right? When you're figuring this out in in the old lease, right? Now here you have, or you can charge it, total or per diem or whatever. You can choose however this is all established in here, when it's due and who it's paid to, right? Same for your monthly rental installments, when they begin, when is the first, with all the other checks that you're getting, when is the first rent required? What that date is, who is it presented to? Same for the security deposit and the pet deposit if there is one. So all the money in regards to this lease is all identified in this one paragraph. Okay? Excellent, right? Excellent. Thank you, NVAR, right?
Quick request for everybody, where it says delivered and payable to for that first full month's rent. Most of you probably know the standard operating procedure with most brokerages is that gets paid to the listing brokerage. Okay? So by having the first box there say landlord, I'm a little concerned that might encourage agents or landlords to check that. But we prefer that, and I would like to see an amendment to our exclusive right to lease listing agreement that where we have pre-printed in that document, our landlord is authorizing us as the listing agent to collect that first month's rent, because it doesn't say that in there right now, and I think it should, because that's how we get paid, right? That's how we know that we're going to have the money, because we're responsible to pay the tenant broker when we're the listing agent. So anyway, just please, generally, it would be the listing brokerage, unless it's a managed property, and then it might be the
It might be managed agent. Now, are there any other property managers in here, right, that use Appfolio through Samson, right? So Samson uses Appfolio, right? And the beautiful thing about that is, right, the first money that comes in reality is tagged as a security deposit, and it's held in Appfolio, right? So when you get the first month's rent, when it's delivered prior to them occupying the property, that's the money that gets used to pay the agents. And the property management side, we never have an issue in most cases where we've dispersed the money to the other side and then had to go recollect it, because on the day of your move-in, the tenant walks up and says, oh, I no longer want the property, or whatever the issue is that arises. So I know a lot of times when we take this first month's rent check and we deposit it at Samson, we're in a hurry to disperse that money. I would highly recommend that you hold that money for a little while and wait to submit your commission disbursement until you're absolutely positively sure that tenant is going to take occupancy, just because it's hard to get that money back. Once it's dispersed, it's really hard to get that money back.
It's
just
a
my
debatable,
own personal.
It is. There are some listing brokerages and some management companies that don't disperse they don't disperse any commissions until, certainly not the tenant broker commission, until the tenant takes possession, until they move in or whatever. That's not what is prescribed, really. I mean, the tenant broker can say, my job's done, the lease is signed, I want to get paid.
Correct.
But back to this landlord thing, you probably will run across it sooner or later. Some landlords, maybe more old school, whatever, they think that it's in their best interest to get that first month's rent paid to them, and then they write us a check as the listing company for the commission. And that means we got to wait. We got to wait on them, right? And so that's one of the things we're trying to avoid.
Right. So,
CC, microphone.
Mr. Microphone. Or I can repeat your question.
Thank you.
Now, when I do,
Speak into it.
Yeah. There you
I
go.
thought when you're signing deed of lease, then you have to submit all the paperwork and whatever the rent or the security deposit you collect have to be submitted. In that case, I usually give it to, in case security deposit wise, to the seller. And if I have my own property, I have them pay me everything. I pay Samson appropriate.
Yeah.
Same time I'm doing paperwork, pay Samson's share and leasing agent's share.
Yeah, you can do that.
So our company policy is that we want the first month's rent paid to Samson, not to the landlord. Even if you are the landlord and you're the agent. Can we work with you? Of course we can. And remember, there's a difference between security deposit and first month's rent.
Right.
On our paperwork, we have a in-house form, the earnest money deposit form, right? And on that form, you can check the box. Is this for a sale? Your typical purchase, earnest money. But there's another box for rental, because the way I look at it, always have, is that first month's rent is, it comes in with, often it'll come in with the application, comes in with the lease. It is effectively earnest money. It's to be applied towards the, it's a credit to the tenant's rental obligation, right?
Okay, and I have another
But
question.
don't label that security deposit. Security deposit does not get paid to Samson.
No.
Steve was talking about Appfolio and property management. That's different, because in that case, all monies are going to the property manager, right?
Correct.
But with us, we don't want to see a check that says security deposit on the memo payable to Samson Properties. I mean, we deal with it when we get them, but that's not appropriate, because the lease says on a non-managed rental that the landlord is holding that security deposit. So we don't want any dispute down the road as to what happened with that money. So first month's rent, EMD, rental earnest money deposit, or lease EMD slash first month's rent. And if the commission is somewhat less than a full month's rent, we're going to pass through the difference to the landlord, and we're going to pay the agents their commissions.
Mike, while I'm here, I want to ask a question again. If, the tenant signed the lease
Yeah.
and delivered all the appropriate checks,
Yeah.
they change their mind later, what happened? Still, they can get away?
Well, that's why you
that's
want certified funds up front.
That's a story.
Exactly.
That's a story for another class.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you can answer
We
yes
could
or
spend
no.
a whole class on that one.
Well, that's why a lot of companies require certified checks or money orders up front.
I usually send the first month rent to Samson through Zophim. Is
Yes.
that still okay?
That's still good. You can still send, the question was, can you still send the first month's rent or the money to EMD to Samson for rentals? Yes. Through Zochem, you can do that.
It goes into
Yep.
escrow. It's considered earnest money.
It can be wired as well. So, all right. So maintaining the flow here. Also here, sticking with the lease, there's this paragraph here at the bottom, and I'm really just going to talk about the bold thing. It says, if any delivered or payable box is unchecked, the amount owed will be delivered and payable to the landlord. So if sometimes if we miss stuff, it just denotes that that's going to happen. They also added space to list 8 occupants, which is another great improvement to this. So paragraph 10, right? So they added this name of occupants, right? So if you have a family, husband, wife, and a family of 3, you can list the other occupants on here. Or if you have the main players on the lease and they have whoever else is living, I would recommend, if you have like a bunch of, like you're doing like I don't want to say roommate, but say you have husband and wife, and then his brother who's 25 and her sister who's 32, I list them all in the top paragraph at the beginning of the lease. But if you have kids
As
or
tenants.
Yeah,
As named tenants.
right. But if you have kids, college kids, that kind of stuff, you can list them here, and then they're in the lease document themselves. Another nice change. They also revised the utilities and services paragraph, fixtures paragraph, to be more consistent with the residential sales contract. So that was another I guess, change that really just marries this up to what the residential sales contract has that listed in. So we've all seen this before, and that's pretty self-explanatory. What, sir?
I hate to slow you down.
Okay.
Can I back up real quick? Paragraph 11, just because this comes up all the time, move-in inspection. All right, Steve, at the end of this, we'll probably touch on the new form that they came out with. NVAR did. They had one years and years ago. It went away for some reason, so most of our agents were operating from the Virginia Realtors form. But the point is that this lease has always, and this is in keeping with the VRLTA, Virginia law as well. Just remember and always tell your landlord, if you're the listing agent, landlord will submit a written report to tenant itemizing the condition of the premises at occupancy, including the identification of any visible evidence of mold, right? All the time we see listing agents not advising their landlords. I mean, Steve's a property manager, has been for years. We talked a long time ago. It's standard procedure for property managers to do it, right? Why? It says it's required in the lease, and if, as a property manager, they're sort of acting as the landlord in that way. They're taking that responsibility. So don't let that get by, because if there's not some written report, it doesn't say how detailed it needs to be, but it's supposed to be, a checklist or a report as to maybe obvious deficiencies or whatever, and any visible evidence of mold. If that's not given to the tenant, and then at the end of the lease, there's a dispute over the security deposit, over the property condition, and it goes before a judge, the first thing the judge is going to ask that landlord is, do you have, can you show me a copy of a written report that you gave the tenant within the first 5 days after the lease term?
Right.
And if the answer is no to that, then there's a pretty good chance the judge is going to rule in favor of the tenant. Tenant's going to get back their security deposit, and the landlord's left high and dry. So
Maybe.
Maybe.
Pictures, too. Pictures, as a landlord, pictures are worth 1,000 words, right? So.
And it doesn't mean that you got to do it, and you shouldn't do it for your tenant, for your client.
You can.
You can be with them. You could do it for them. I advise against doing it for them.
With them.
Do it with them. It's just like a walkthrough. You shouldn't do a pre-settlement walkthrough for your people unless there's no other alternative. You got them on FaceTime or you're doing something like that.
Correct.
So.
All right. Good info. And then, so finishing up with the, so utility paragraph looks very similar to that as in the sales contract. They also did the same thing to the fixtures and appliances paragraph before. You used to have to, in the old lease, you had to write everything in. Now they have check boxes just like they do in the contract, right? So a lot simpler now to fill this out. They also made a revision to they revised the move-out inspection paragraph to make optional whether the tenant performs move-out, cleaning, maintenance responsibilities, or landlord performs and withholds costs from the security deposit. So in the move-out paragraph, they added a couple additional things in here, and of course, there's some check boxes in here to make sure that you check if they apply. So if you got a property with all hardwoods and none of these other things, you don't have to check certain boxes, because there was always a question from tenants is, there's no chimney. There's no fireplace. Do I have to clean the chimney? There's no this. Do I have to do this? Well, it says in the lease that I do. Can I get some sort of notification that I don't? So now you actually have check boxes for this kind of stuff, so it's very nice.
And it doesn't eliminate the tenant obligations paragraph. That's all separate. Okay.
Right.
I guess these are items that we find to be negotiable sometimes. Sometimes the landlord says, no, I'm gonna let my preferred contractor, cleaner, or pest control person take care of that, and you're gonna pay me X amount.
Right. And sometimes when your clients entered into a lease, sometimes you would see language in the MLS listing that said that there's like a $250 move-out cleaning fee. Well, now if you're doing that, they've incorporated it into the lease now. So here in the last paragraph, it says the landlord and tenant agree that the landlord will perform any cleaning and maintenance responsibilities not checked above. Landlord and tenant further acknowledge and agree that the landlord will withhold X amount of security deposit in exchange for performing these services. So if you're doing, if you're not going to have, say, I'm going to say gutters, carpet, gutter, chimney cleaning, whatever. I mean, if I'm a property manager and I want to control those things, because over the years I've learned that carpet cleaning, I want to use Stanley Steamer or a professional carpet cleaner, but my tenants want to find somebody on Instacart or some $150 carpet cleaner guy that pulls up in a pickup truck and has like a extended vacuum cleaner, and they classify that as professional carpet cleaning. So as a landlord, you may want to say, I'm going to handle that, but it's going to cost $500 or whatever that price is. So it's another good change.
Something to be said for that. A lot of experienced landlords do that, right?
Yes, yes. Also, they combined default and enforcement clauses into one paragraph. So they just kind of reconfigured the lease a little bit in paragraph 30 and 31. Or 30, they took that, and all the stuff that used to be in those two paragraphs, they now moved into one. So not something that I'm going to go over, but it's stuff that was in the lease before. Nothing really new in here. They also revised this SCA paragraph to include, so that was the serviceman's paragraph in regards to military, and what they did was they added in State Department of State or United States State Department. So if someone's working for the State Department and they also rent a property and they have to move due to orders from the State Department, they're now covered under the Service Members Civil Rights Act. So they added those people into this caveat. So now if you rent to State Department people, they have the right to.
There's a lot of them around here, right?
Right. So that pretty much covers the changes in the lease that I was going to go over. If there's any questions, feel free to chime up real quick. Otherwise, I'm going to trudge on. Okay. All right. The other new form that Mike was talking about earlier was the new form for the move-in, move-out. Not going to get too in-depth into this form, just to let you know of its existence. So there's, it's pretty much each form is used for one task, right? So you use this for the move-in. You go through the property, or the landlord, you and the landlord go through the property, you note it on the landlord's notes, and then you give a copy of this to the tenants, and then as they move in over those 5 days, at the end of those 5 days, they have to make any additional notes, and if they don't, then the original notes from the landlord stand, right? So they would provide this back to you within the 5 days. Otherwise, whatever notes were listed from the beginning would be the ones that are held for the lease term. Got rid of ice trays. So
I just wanted to clarify real quick with the wording. It said that the landlord needed to do the inspection within the first 5 days that the tenant moved in. So,
well, actually, the landlord.
Lease start date.
Right. The landlord, normally, it's probably best that the landlord provide this to the tenant upon their occupancy.
That's why I was
Before
confused.
they move in, yeah.
And then the tenant has 5 days?
Okay, that's what I've typically done, where the landlord does it right before.
They
Right.
should, yeah. That's a
Okay,
good point.
the wording was just confusing to me, so.
But the law says they got to, because it is the law, it's not just this lease, it's VRLTA, that they need to do it no later than 5 days after.
Right.
Those
The
lease
landlord,
start
I
date.
mean, they could do it after that day, but I would just say best practice is probably to have it done when the tenant moves in. That you walk through the property or give this to them at that time. They do their thing.
And I encourage you, I really do encourage you to have your landlord do it. Be there. You can be there if you want, if you're a listing agent, because oftentimes a tenant agent may be there with the tenant. They're not required to, but if it's a non-managed rental, we want to encourage the best possible relationship and launching of that business relationship from the start. And this is a big part of that.
Would you recommend the landlord? What you're saying is the landlord and tenant doing it together within the first 5 days?
I do. That's the way I used to do it.
And then last question. This is a little off topic, but when it comes to tenants, they typically want a walkthrough before they move in as well. And I've dealt with a couple. Is that even a thing, to be honest? Because I never know really how to respond to that.
They're going to see the property typically
Yeah.
before they put in their rental application.
Yeah.
And hey, if you're a tenant rep, and the best time to put terms with your offer, which is your rental application, that's an offer, is to include that with your rental application.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and most of the time you get those requests is when a prospective tenant goes through the property and the property looks like a Dipsy dumpster, right? So they want assurances prior to them showing up on the day of their first day of rent that property doesn't look the same. So.
Yeah, I mean, I encourage landlords to look upon their tenants as assets, business assets. So don't ever encourage your landlord to be the kind of landlord that's looking to get over on their tenant. That's a mistake. I mean, obviously there's a middle road, but that's why it's good to have a reasonable documentation in the beginning with photos so that the tenant isn't held responsible at the end for stuff that they shouldn't be. And that just creates disputes, right? And they try to suck us back into that, Oh,
yes.
My concern is regarding the mold. So even with the mold now, they have 5 days after the tenants have moved in. So that can cause a lot of issues.
Well, it depends on the severity, right? I mean, it's the severity of the mold, right? I mean, if there's most of the time what you're seeing is you're doing a walkthrough with the tenant and there's surface mold or something of that nature under a bathroom sink or maybe in the basement, and everybody starts to freak out, right? Okay, first of all, it may look like mold, but until it's tested, no one knows what it is, right? It could be ash for all we know.
My concern is I have a client who has 3 small children, and she's very, very A-type personality. She wants an assurance that there's no mold, so we can put that as a condition when we are offering.
You could try. You could have a mold test as a provision in your rental application.
Okay.
The tough part in our market, it's been so heavily favoring landlords for so long, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's crazy to be a tenant, but.
Right. I mean, the probability of finding a property with 0 mold is not a very high probability.
Yeah, if you look hard enough.
Well, I mean, sterile environments. I mean, houses or inside dwellings it's a consistent battle to keep moisture out, right? And this is a pet peeve of mine because I've been doing rental for so long now. But sometimes you get a tenant in there that has these crazy thoughts of mold, right? And they look at a bathroom and they see a little bit of discoloration in the caulk, and all of a sudden it's called mold, and they don't want to move into the property, okay? And first of all, you got to test. You got to make sure that it is or isn't. And if it isn't, okay, but you can identify something during the walkthrough as potential hazard and have it tested. And once it's tested, if it's determined to be mold, then that situation with the paragraph of mold would kick in, and that would be taken care of.
So we can just put the lease as contingent on mold inspection?
But I mean, if you have a tenant like that and they're like that, then I would recommend that your tenant step forward and say, hey, we're okay with signing a lease and all this kind of stuff, but we would like to do a mold air quality test before 7 days before we move in.
They're the same as to be a contingent upon.
Yeah, and if there is mold, we want to guarantee that the landlord will take care of it.
Good luck with that, right?
Right. Well,
but it may be on older properties where you can see more evidence of mold.
But you could do it. But in this market, I would probably put the onus on the tenant because they're the ones that have the potential issue with it, right? And then lastly is the new home sales addendum. We're not going to get too crazy in depth in this one either, but really all they did with this was this form has been updated consistent with the relevant changes to the residential sales contract. So if you're doing new home sales, and in most of the cases, this is really when you have a builder that is small builder that may not have their own forms, and you're going to use the normal NVAR sales contract, you would want to attach this new home sales addendum to your contract.
A lot of you are like, what?
And I can't
Never
see.
seen that, right?
I can't see what I'm on, so. Oh, there we go. And so that just gives you kind of a depiction. It's a couple-page document. Then we have any questions, and then we're gonna.
The only other document was, as you said,
Is property management.
We're not really going to dive into
which
that.
I didn't include in your package, but I did make a couple copies of the new property management agreement that goes over the property management agreement changes and stuff like that. And I will have to say, having been a property manager now for like 14 years, it used to look like this. And then they changed it like 5 years ago, and it looked like what it used to look like. And now it's back to the way that it was. So it's great, right? So they were kind of joking about it at the NVAR thing that we went to last Thursday, that the attorney Matt Troiani came in, and that was one of his first forms that they tackled, and that's how come it looked that way. And then of course, as they progressed through, they realized, hey, this form doesn't really do what we want it to do, so let's make it more in line with all the other forms that we have. So that's what they did. They changed it back to almost the way that it was, with, of course, updates as required by the VRLTA.
Hey, you all, including everybody out there in cyberspace. Property management, we do get questions. I get questions from time to time from people who have been doing some amount of independent property management. Maybe they came from another brokerage, and their brokerage allowed them to do independent property management. A lot of companies don't allow that. If you have a scenario like that, please reach out, because our policy says we don't want you doing any independent property management without checking in and getting broker awareness, broker approval, okay? Because we have some separate paperwork that goes along with that. There's a whole can of worms of risk that's different with property management, especially if you're collecting rent and holding security deposits. That's where it really gets serious. So anybody out there that has questions about that and how this property management agreement might come into play with that or what, please reach out and let me know. We'll talk about it.
And then last but not least, right, they made a general change to a lot of forms, right? So they said initials have been removed from the bottom of each page of forms. We will continue this practice for remaining forms as they are updated. Initials need only be added where there is a strike-through or handwritten change to the printed form. So if you've noticed on a lot of the forms that have been updated, they removed the initials on each page. All that's required is a signature on the last page. They're going to continue down that path. There's still a lot of you guys out there that are putting them in on each page. If you can still do that if you want.
On the listing agreements and buyer agency agreements?
So it's fine if you're going to still do that, but I'm just letting you know it's not required anymore. All that has to be done is your client has to sign the last page as prescribed in there, or any places that there might be an initial for things that they're invoking throughout the contract. Plus the other, so a lot of times too is like some of the older folks that have been doing real estate for a long period of time. Like if you do a form and you go and sit down with your client, and of course you may have pre-printed some stuff in there, if you make a change to that on that form before it's signed, you don't have to have that initialed all 17 places on your document where you made a couple changes. Once it's signed by your client and then you send it in for brokerage signature, that's fine. You can make those changes. Everything doesn't have to be initialed before this. But once say that you're doing a listing agreement and then the sellers sign, and then you make additional changes after they sign, then those have to be initialed. But if you're making changes to a document or writing things in during the process, you don't have to have each of those things signed.
Right.
But we
Same
have some
stands true with an
we have
offer
some
if
folks
you're a
here
buyer.
that have been, I guess, realtors for a long time, and that's the way that they used to do it.
Yeah.
When they had, those, what are those black pieces of paper that were between the forms? Carbon, right? So during
I'll
those
say that
days,
Sarah
right?
Mormon was emphatic. She doesn't like this change, removing the initials at the bottom of the pages. She's like, nah, I don't know about that. You know, teach his own. But,
Right.
all right.
And then any general questions, quick questions related to what we have, and we're going to close this out. And then we'll stick around for any other questions that might be off topic that you wanted to discuss.
Yep.
Nothing? All right, well, thank you all for coming. It was great to see you. And we'll see you again next year. No.
Yeah.
Or next month.
Next month. 2 weeks.